Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Elevating Your Life. And we are going to be elevated today. I have an amazing guest to share with you today. We have Chris Niebauer. He earned his Ph.D. in cognitive neuropsychology at the University of Toledo, specializing in the differences between the left and right sides of the brain. He is a former professor at Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania, where he taught courses on consciousness, mindfulness, left and right brain differences, and artificial intelligence. Chris is the author of No Self, No Problem. It's an absolutely fantastic book. I just loved it. I made notes all through the book. And I loved all the left brain, right brain, so much great information. But first off, welcome, Chris.
Oh, hey, Paula, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Oh, so happy to have you on the show. Well, would you like to share a little more of your background and kind of, what steps got you to deciding to write this book, No Self, No Problem?
You hear so many stories of people. Their path starts with their suffering, and it takes them someplace that they would have never expected. And that was so true for me. And so, I talk a little bit about it in the book, how my father had died very unexpectedly, and seeing what death did to people, it just really took me to a place of being incredibly anxious. I was so anxious over death, and I saw death as this enemy that somehow had to be defeated. And I started looking for answers, and that's really why I ended up getting a psych degree. I thought, well, it kind of makes sense. Psychology has studied all this, coming to terms with things and figuring, here's a problem, here's anxiety, and here's how you fix it. And so I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, but it just wasn't. It was helpful, but I always felt like it was missing something. And it was when I was an undergrad that I started getting into Eastern philosophies. And in particular, it was Alan Watts, who just has my whole life has kind of served as my mentor in the kind of the spiritual guidance. And he just seemed to have that. He was the missing piece of the puzzle. He seemed to understand things about the mind that were missing in psychology. So when I was able to put them both together, I thought, well, this is just it's so powerful to put these two things together. And then I started going on my journey and saying, okay, well, you're at this point of immense suffering. And I absolutely remember a point of complete surrender. And I stopped trying to fight it. I had realized that my real anxiety was me not wanting to be anxious. And as soon as I could just say, well, there's anxiety, there it is again, and stop fighting it. And all of a sudden, it really mellowed out. I remember being like, well, that is the strangest thing, that when you stop fighting something and it sort of goes away. And that sort of set me on a path of figuring out really what is this, how does the mind really work? Because psychology has studied the mind in the lab for a really long time. And of course, I was in a lab in grad school looking at left-right brain differences, and everything I saw about the way the mind works seemed to fit with what the left brain does. And everything about that moment of surrender, that moment of stepping back and letting things happen, having a little trust in the universe, that all seemed to be associated with the right brain. And so I was putting all this together, that what I had really experienced was a shift from being in the, I call it a left brain loop, where you're just kind of, going over the same thing, and you're trying to find answers, but it's all within the same system. And it's very hard to find really creative answers. And then I had shifted from that left brain kind of repetitive anxiety to right brain peace and right brain acceptance. And so then I ended up going into the university, and I was teaching a while, and had a week of really bad insomnia. I couldn't sleep. And the whole idea of the book, it just kind of came to me, and I put an outline together, and I just kept thinking, well, if I can't sleep, I'm going to do something. And but the more I got the process going, the more I was surprised to see how much of it was already done. And And so that kind of is how it got together. And then the no self, no problem was pretty successful. So we followed it up with the workbook. And because when no self, no problem came out, what people really liked, and I got so many comments on this, they like the exercises. And, it's like, don't give me too much philosophy, and I came to use this kind of as a little bit of a mantra of sorts. Like, you can't fix a thinking problem with more thinking. And so instead of just, here's so much to think about, we focused in on the exercises. So we came out with a workbook in March, and the workbook is exactly that. It's just so many exercises so you can directly experience all this for yourself. And so it's really your path. It's the reader's path. And so that's been out for a while. It's been also pretty successful. But again, people they like to experience it. They don't want to believe or try to, oh, do I have to trust this author? And, how do I know, yeah, he has a PhD, but it's still like, how do I know he's really on the right track? Rather than doing all that, it's just direct experience for the reader so they can do these exercises and experience that most of our problems come from the thinking processes of the left brain. And once you figure that out and shift from relying on the left brain all the time, which is so reflective of our culture, and when you start exploring other cultures, it's remarkable that not all cultures think as much as we do here in the West. And there seems to be a really close relationship between how much you think, because when you consider in the West, so much was influenced by Rene Descartes, and he put it very simplistically, like, I think, therefore I am. And that's kind of the way we define ourselves. We think, therefore we are. And so our thinking is first and foremost defining of our existence. And then when you explore different cultures around the world, not everyone is like this. And most importantly, when you find cultures that are not obsessed with thinking, you find this enormous happiness. Some of the happiest people on the planet really spend very little time thinking.
Yes, yes. And the impression from the awesome information in this book, what it gave me is, okay, the left brain, that's the thinker, the controller, the ego. And the right brain is the intuition, creativity, trust. And that made me really realize and think about, I don't want one side to have control. I want to have balance and let those things in. That is really exciting to think about and realize that is how our brain is set up.
Well, I really love the way you put that too. And it's really reflects the goal of the book, is because sometimes people say, well, what do you just want to, eliminate the left brain altogether? And there's a certain irony with this, because when we find that balance and we're not 80% in the left brain, when we bring it back to more equal time for both, actually the left brain ends up working more effectively. And actually when we see it as a tool and we understand what it's here for, what problems was it here to solve, and we let it solve the problems that it evolved to solve, then it actually works so much more effectively than it did before. And so but the key, and you hit it perfectly, the key is really finding some balance and finding that what the Buddha called the middle way. And to find the balance, we're so asymmetrical right now, we're so imbalanced, that we do have to talk about all the really cool stuff that the right brain does, and all the depth of the conscious experiences that we have with right brain consciousness, because the left brain really becomes kind of a judge and jury, and it really devalues so many right brain processes. And you see this in the school systems. You see that, so many right brain processes, music, art, poetry, they don't seem to have the status that, like, left brain engineering, STEM, these kinds of things have. And it's not to devalue one or the other. It's just to try to find some balance between the two.
Yeah, because each side has its unique ability to really help us and help us develop and help us to live happy and peaceful. So yeah, if we can bring that balance in, that's huge. That is huge. That's a great goal.
When we look at, we're struggling to find meaning, and meaning's a tough one, because if you're trying to find meaning with the left brain can only go so deep when it comes to meaning. It tries to understand, but it's so focused on the parts. It's so focused on these little problems, trying to solve this problem, and we get caught up in finances, relationships, and so the left brain is busy with these isolated little pieces, parts. And one of the things the right brain is so much better at is looking at, it steps back. It can step back and look at the whole context. It literally gets the big picture. And that's where meaning comes from. And so really, when we start asking, like, what am I doing here? What's my role? And we have to, so the left brain, it's like, it's so close to the problem. It just can't go back far enough to see how things fit together, and how at the time, maybe this seemed like this was going wrong and this was going wrong. None of this stuff worked out the way the left brain ego wants it to. And that's life, because rarely does life work out the way the left brain plans. But then we're disconnected from the meaning. And so when we bring more attention to right brain awareness and we revalue it and we recognize how important it is, then all of a sudden these wonderful moments of meaning happen. And we know from all kinds of psychological research that I mean, you could have money and you could have a great job and you could have all these things, but without meaning, none of it really provides us with the totality of our human experience. We're not a full human being until we put meaning into that equation.
Yes. I kind of, when I thought about the left brain, right brain relationship, I kind of thought about, okay, left brain is my mind chatter, all the chatter.
Mm-hmm.
And the right brain is, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to just breathe and I'm going to enjoy the sunset that I'm looking at. You know, that's how I kind of looked at that. That's kind of helping me understand it a little bit. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's so many ways that reflects the basic processing of the left and right sides of the brain. So language is what the left brain does. And so when we're not talking to someone else, we're using our inner voice. And it's not, and a couple people have pointed this out to me, because technically speaking, it's true. Not everyone has an inner voice. There are rare exceptions of people, we're still not sure why, but they don't talk to themselves. And so I just want to, it's true that there are people like that. But so many of us, we have an inner voice and it's not as positive as we would like. And so really, when you get into what the left brain is doing, again, it's I always think of it as a survival mechanism. So it's trying to figure out these problems, and it has a kind of paranoid, not a real happy attitude, because it's there for survival, not to make us happy. And so it's going to focus on these problems using that inner voice. And when it can't find a problem, it just makes them up. And I have my students that I would have them follow, like, okay, you think you have this problem, and write down in your journal how confident you are that this is really a problem, that this is really going to go the way you think it is. And by the end of the semester, we had tested it. So how accurate is the inner voice? And it's not very accurate. I mean, some of the best estimates were 50-50. Most of them were like, my inner voice is only right, like, a tenth of the time. And so, from a survival perspective, it was just right, just enough to help us survive. But now, I mean, our world is so much different, and the problems that we have to solve are so much different than what the left brain is used to. Living in that mode of, and you mentioned, like, it's always like, what's the next thing I need to do? And the left brain loves schedules, and it's always concerned with, problem solving. And so what's the next problem that I have to solve? But the right brain isn't concerned with time. The right brain isn't concerned with getting anywhere. And the right brain, really, the one way I think you put it like this, like there's no place to go and nothing to do. And the right brain is in that moment. And so when you look at different cultures, and so there's this group in the Amazon called the Pitahan, and they don't think very much. They're so in tune with nature that the researcher who spent some time with them, the thing that struck him is that they lived in the immediacy of experience. And so they didn't hear that voice. They were not obsessed with stories. They didn't tell stories. They had no stories as a culture. And they were so blessed with that immediate experience that the very first thing that people noticed when Westerners would meet this Pitahan group, the first thing they noticed is how happy they were. They were continuously smiling. They were laughing all the time. So that suggests strongly that our natural state is one of happiness, that we were really meant to be laughing most of the day and enjoying it. And that's our natural state. And what we have superimposed on that is a lot of left brain thinking and left brain problems. And again, and I go through this with the books, but test it out for yourself. Test to see how often these thoughts, and it takes a while because we've come to rely so much and we've trust so much that these thoughts are accurate, that is the essence of worry. And it's interesting, the Pitahan, they don't even have a word for worry. That's not in their language. And that's just, so to me, it was very remarkable. I'm like, here's a group of people that found the trick of happiness. And it's all about at least having moment. It doesn't have to be all day, because there might be practical things it's great to bring the left brain online and solve this problem. But like you said, here's one conscious breath. Here's the sunset. Here's the wind on my face and the sun, and those moments ground us in a really literal way to the direct conscious experiences. And it seems to be that's the secret to joy and bliss and finding some peace in life.
Wow, I love that. Oh, I have a new mantra. No worry, just live. I love it.
And
that is fantastic. And they don't even have what we're capable of doing on just changing a bit of our mindset, huh?
It is a qualitative shift in I think where humanity's going, because there seems to be like more than just these reflections here and there. It seems like we've finally, as a culture, we've worn out the thinking program. We're at a point where we realize, whether it's like a direct realization or it's just kind of on the tip of the tongue, we realize that we know money is not going to do it, and we kind of know. Some people, they know it at one level, but they're still seduced by paychecks and more money and bigger houses. So and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in fact, you could have a big house or a small house, but we're recognizing that what we're really looking for isn't out there at all. It's something within. And at least in my work, it's recognizing those right brain conscious moments. And when you look at the right brain, it seems to be necessary for humor. So people who have right brain damage, a lot of their humor, they lose that ability. Metaphor, poetry, the right brain seems to have all these. Well, just think about how funny laughing is. It's a great thing to really have a lot of fun and find yourself. And there's even a form of therapy where they get in groups and they just laugh all weekend, and it just brings so much happiness to people. But the left brain is so confused by this, because the left brain has no way it can conceptualize and understand what laughing is all about. Or what humor is about. and so the left brain, if we're going to bring this balance, the left brain, we have to, as a species, recognize that the left brain is it's like a hammer. It's great if you got a nail, but you don't want to use it as a pillow, and and you don't want to go looking for the meaning in your life with the left brain, because the left brain is going to tell you all kinds of stories that you'll be happy when you get this job, you'll be happy when you get a relationship, you'll be happy, and it's going to go on, and then you'll get the relationship, and then you'll get this, and then it'll just come up with another one.
Something else on the list. Yep.
And so we those are those left brain loops that we have to be careful of. And so if we can take those conscious breaths, it's not a surprise that mindfulness and meditation have suddenly exploded in our culture. I mean, they were here and there in the 60s, there's no doubt. But here I found myself in the middle of a university setting, teaching a class on mindfulness in the brain, and taking our yoga mats out to the quad. And I mean, it's a hint that something very interesting is happening. And it was one of the most popular classes. And I had students, they were taking it, again, a little hint here, that they were taking it for no reason. It wasn't something that was part of their degree. They just recognized that to bring that balance, they were looking for hints. They were looking for some, breadcrumbs to find their way home. And I think our way home is that immediacy of experience.
Oh, Chris, this is just so fantastic. Oh my gosh, I love this. You're sharing such fantastic information. Tell us a little more about your workbooks. So we can purchase workbooks to help us with the left brain and right brain.
Yeah, so the workbook is it kind of looks similar to the No Self, No Problem, but it just says workbook on it, so you could tell the difference. And it's on Amazon too. But what we did with that is we really went into really simple exercises. I wanted to keep everything simple, so I'll just do one right now just to show you what kind of stuff we talk about. And so again, we have this voice in the head. When it's focused on the right kind of problems, it can be really effective. But then it's the same thing that keeps us up at night. We're trying to sleep, and the voice in the head is saying, "Oh, I shouldn't have sent that email. My boss is going to be really bad. And tomorrow when I go into," and it's just going on, and we're just like we're desperately trying to, in the dark, trying to find a switch to turn it off so we can go to sleep. The trick is it's not going to come with one exercise or two. That's what you have. I think it's different for all people. Sometimes it does take one exercise, and something just clicks, and they realize that the voice in the head isn't who they are. That I actually refer to it as Mind 1.0 because it's an old program that's never been updated. And it's not who we are. It's a tool that helps us survive that we mistakenly identify ourselves with. We think we are that voice in the head. And then we get in this very perplexing situation where we're trying to control it. But it's not who we are. And so one of the ways, and I tell people, and I get a lot of questions about, it seems like so many people suffer from intrusive thoughts, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I control these thoughts because they're so disturbing? And I simply point out to them, doesn't the fact that you can't stop those thoughts prove to you they're not who you are? And people will have they'll almost look shocked. They're like, wow, I didn't think of it that. I didn't consider that the very fact that I can't control them shows that it can't be me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And so I start off with some simple exercises to prove that voice in the head isn't who you are. And I say, okay, well, here's a pattern. And I'm going to say two numbers, and I don't want you to say the third one in your head. And I say 3, 2, we all said 1 in our head. We couldn't stop it. And I tell people, well, let's do it over again. And I have a bunch of different variations on this, but it shows you that you can't control the voice in the head, and you're wasting so much energy. And when you stop trying to control it, and when you have the recognition that it's not who you are, there's so many resources of energy that wake up, because you're not
free.
wasting it with this futile effort that's impossible. You can't control it. It's not who you are. And you're not so concerned with what it does anymore. And so it may have these, thoughts, and maybe some of them are negative, but it doesn't really affect you the same way, because it's like, it's not who I am. Yeah. Why? Let it do its thing. And then something very surprising happens, where the less you identify, the less energy, conscious energy you're putting into it, all of a sudden it turns down, and it really starts to mellow out. And so that's sort of what my trip has been about. And I was so, my whole source of anxiety was trying to control the voice in the head, because it was so destructive and it was such a critic, and it was so negative. It always looked on the worst possibility and never had anything, it rarely had anything positive. And then when I had this recognition that it's just this old survival program, it's not who I am.
Yeah.
I wasn't as worried about it. And then simultaneously, what happens, you have more energy, and then you start noticing the sunsets. You start noticing that everything is absolutely okay. Right now, everything's okay. And you recognize there's no, you don't have any problem. And it's such a mind-blowing experience when you realize, like, everything's okay right now. There's nothing to fix.
Oh, Chris, I love it. I love it. I love it. We have about 1 minute left in the show.
Okay.
What last words do you want to say to everybody? This has been so fantastic.
It's wonderful for me to see certain memes catch on. And one of the memes that has caught on is don't believe everything that you think. And I really think if you want to put this into one phrase that will help you shift from left brain inner dialogue to right brain immediacy of experience, just put that into your awareness and use it as like a daily meditation. Don't believe everything that you think. And it sounds simple, and it is. It could be, it's not a complex philosophy, but it's a shift in consciousness that is really all that you really need. And so if we wanted to boil this down to the most simplistic message, when you recognize that you're not, I should put it this way, you are vastly more mysterious, more beautiful, more eternal than a simple voice in the head. Once that recognition happens, where your being starts to become more obvious. And you recognize that, and it is a really interesting part of it, that you've always been this way, that all those worry, that they were like clouds, but the sun was always shining behind them.
Yeah.
And you always had this sense of peace. It was just hidden.
Chris, this has been so fantastic. I think we're going to have you on again, because this is just too wonderful. So much to share. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. So grateful. Love, hugs, and blessings.